I believe in owning and fixing as opposed to replacing and throwing away. I believe that our stuff is sort of the antithesis of cheap shit in the best possible way. We try to build things that don't break, number one. And if they do break, be really easy to fix. If it requires something to fix, you can do it yourself because we put all the effort into making it sort of simple, which is hard. And it's easy just to make a bunch of stuff that kind of fits together in a box, right? When you do that, you end up with something that's more of a joy to use. And if you really look at it over not just your initial investment, but the number of times you're going to use this thing and the amount of joy you're going to extrapolate from it in its life, you end up way, way, way net positive. It's a hard thing to get your head around because that initial investment is higher, but that's where consumerism needs to change.
All right, guys, we're in for a treat on this episode of the Valor Coffee Podcast. I have Douglas Weber from Weber Workshops. Weber Workshops is a manufacturer of beautiful, high-end, thoughtful coffee products. One of my favorite coffee brands out there, making incredible products like the EG1. It's a grinder. You've probably seen it. It looks like a crazy telescope. And we just talked about coffee business, and kind of took a dive on his past as a product designer at Apple, to starting Weber, to opening some cafes in Japan where he lives. So it was an exploration, if you will, of Douglas Weber and all things Weber Workshops. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Do want to turn your attention to the sponsors of the program, including Flash Quotes. Flash Quotes has kind of changed the game for us. Not even kind of, just really changed the game for us with our catering operation. Flash Quotes helps caterers in their operations from lining up what cart you're going to use, from scheduling people out, who's going to work the event, to quoting, invoicing. It's really a one-stop shop, if you will. If you go to flashquotes.com/valor and sign up today, you'll get an awesome embed form you can put on your website where people can book directly there. And then it just integrates so well into our workflows. We've really been able to automate it, and we've seen our catering business, I don't know, I think we've already exceeded our numbers from last year in catering just because of Flash Quotes. So flashquotes.com/valor. And another reason our catering has grown so much is our friends Localize. Localize, they are our preferred SEO partners. And the reason that we really started to focus on SEO was because Justin, the man behind Flash Quotes, said, hey, you guys need to dial up your SEO. That's how you book catering events. We said, okay, went to Localize, and Localize helped us dial in our SEO game. And lo and behold, we have leads out the wazoo. If you go to localizegrowth.com/valor and sign up, you will get a free backlink. Backlinks really help your SEO, usually a $300 value. So you got to do it. And lastly, our community platform is bustling with people in the chats. Chat, what's up? It's kind of just the place to be if you have questions about coffee, running a coffee business, starting a coffee cart, running a roastery. We've got people in there talking about all sorts of things. Like we have an open chat where people are talking about severance. It's a good show. Can't blame them. So check out the community, top link in the description down below, and sign up. There is a free tier, and then the paid tier is only $7.99 a month, and you get access to everything, including our Barista 101 course, our spreadsheets that we use daily in our company. It's really, really great. It's really great. Okay, here we go. Enjoy this program with Douglas Weber. All right, guys, welcome back, or welcome for the first time to another episode of the Valor Coffee Podcast. I am currently here with Douglas Weber of Weber Workshops. If you aren't familiar with Weber, they make beautiful, premium, it's great to look at coffee gear, and great to use from my experience as well. So we are stoked to have you on. I guess, do you want to give a couple minute intro of how you got into coffee? And I know I listened to pretty much any podcast I could find with you on it before this one. And I know it always steers in the direction of your background with Apple. So if you want to start there and kind of tell us about how you got into coffee.
Well, thanks first of all for having me on, Riley. I really appreciate it. We really enjoyed doing podcasts and talking to other people about things that we wouldn't normally expect. As you know, we're in this for, you know, the machine aspect, designing and making machines and things that we think can add something to the coffee world. And it's always great to see how other people perceive those. And we like to use this as an opportunity to learn ourselves. So thanks again for having us.
Oh, yeah.
As for my own background with coffee, runs pretty deep, runs sort of pre-third wave. You know, I sort of grew up in, I guess I don't know what you call it, like the educational grind in the U.S. Back in the 90s, and coffee shops were kind of where I would go to study before I really liked coffee. It was a kind of a caffeine source and a place just to kind of chill with cool vibes while studying for exams. And that kind of went on, you know, until I went into university, where the coffee shop was also the place where you could go to both kind of hang out and study, kind of an excuse to study, but really hanging out. And that always stuck with me until I actually started to enjoy the beverage, which was shortly after joining, as you mentioned, Apple early on. That was back in, you know, around the year 2000, 2001. It was when I joined, and right when sort of third wave coffee hit the West Coast in the US. And, you know, we would go to the one or two third wave coffee joints that existed in the Mission in San Francisco at the time. You know, have an espresso or a cappuccino on the way into work, and then even at work, you know, in the design studio, we had an old FEMA E61 machine that we would play with, and that was always the start of a design meeting. Was go in, make a coffee, see if we could do like the prettiest cappuccino like artwork, and then start talking about the next generation of iPod that we were working on. And around that time, you know, when we were making iPods, and I was joking, you know, with some of the other guys on the team, it's like, wow, like, we're making these things and they're really cool, but it'd be really fun to work on some coffee products. And I was, you know, very seriously considering doing that from early on in my my career at Apple. But I had a really cool job, and that kind of held me to that job for about 13 years until it was time to go and do my own thing. And that was about 10 years ago now. So, you know, yeah, it's brought me a long way. And I was really, really happy and really fortunate to be able to pursue sort of both things, learn everything I could from a company like Apple, which was great, make great connections, and then be able to apply those learnings to a different industry, and one that I've felt close to and passionate about for 2 or 3 decades now.
Amazing. Cool. And you are in Japan now. What took you to Japan, out of curiosity?
I grew up in a Japanese/Taiwanese neighborhood in Los Angeles. All my best friends growing up were either like Taiwanese immigrant children or Japanese. The Japanese tended not to be immigrants; they tended to be people that were there on assignment. So kids who were there for 4 or 5 years working for, in the case of my best friend, a Japanese bank. And then, if you're familiar with this part of history, but like in the early 90s, the Japanese economy had a big crash. And so my friends, my Japanese friends who were living in LA at the time, literally every single one of them, I had 4 or 5 that were in a group that were all friends together with, all moved back to Japan within the course of one summer. And my best friend, a guy named Daisuke, was I was really close to their family. He used to be at his house every day after school playing roller hockey and, Nintendo and little Tamiya cars and things like that. And so when they moved back, they're like, you want to come back to Japan with us for the summer? And I said, sure, that'd be great. His mom had already been teaching me Japanese for a couple of years. So I had the language sort of background when I was starting 8 or 9 years old. And that always stuck with me. So university times, it was kind of obvious I was going to go and study abroad in Japan. Did that. I had the language down. I had an engineering degree, and I put those together when I was at Apple because we were doing a bunch of sort of, how would you say, like innovative manufacturing processes, and they were really good at doing those things in Japan. And so I was able to sort of take the design things that we were working on and find places in Japan to make things kind of at a different level or with a different twist. And I somehow convinced Apple to let me go and start a new sort of design team based in Japan. back in 2007 and just stuck with it from there, even until I quit. So I was in Japan for Apple from, for the second half of my tenure there, and then just stayed on after I left Apple to live here. Even though I run a company that's technically based in the US, we've kind of got offices all around.
How much of your time is spent traveling? Is a good bit?
Oh, very, very little these days.
Cool.
Comparatively. I mean, with small kids, I try to keep everything pretty remote. That's part of why, I have our own team of people based in Taipei. It's on my time zone. It's less than a 2-hour flight away. So it's kind of like LA, San Francisco style for me to go there. Anytime I need to be there, I can, you need me there tomorrow? Sure, I'll be there tomorrow. But I can go and only be there for like a day or two and still be back. It's not like international travel. It's, it feels very close, but it's, it helps us keep things moving quickly and always on the ball.
Yeah. How big is your team kind of worldwide?
Worldwide, say close to 20 people. We've got a few in Colorado, which is where our headquarters is in the US. And that's kind of like our biggest single logistic point. We try to bring a lot of stuff in there because the US is just a big market for specialty coffee equipment. And then most of our, I guess the workforce, the biggest team is in Taiwan, in Taipei. So we've got all of our engineers, logistics people, some customer service there. We've got a couple of customer service guys who are remote, based in the Philippines, but had grown up in California and other places. So they help spread things around time zones. And then we've got another place in Hamburg in Germany that covers all of our EU needs. And that's a guy named Christian Klatt. Soon to be growing team there as well. And that allows us to sort of serve things globally 24 hours and always have people at whatever's going on in the coffee world, almost anywhere.
Is a good bit of your role R&D? And I guess I'm interested in hearing how R&D plays itself out, being so spread out and iterating on work. And, if you're working on a new product, obviously communications and actually getting hands-on with this product across the globe.
Yeah. I mean, historically speaking, I was in, I have a career that's runs deepest in what's called product design. And product design is kind of the fusion of industrial design and mechanical engineering. It's how you make something. Really, like, understand how everything is made, put those things together, solve problems through, innovations in design and manufacturing. Kind of what makes Apple products slick and unique. I was lucky enough to be around some of the best people in the industry with that, Jonathan Ives' team and all those guys, a couple of which, you check our website, who are still on the board of my company now, who are people who also love coffee and are some of the best designers in the world. And I've got people like that, always in communications and close to what we do. And then kind of combining that with the back end of just the people who are the best in the world at figuring out how to make things and how to make things that are going to last a really long time, and also create sort of supply chains that are a bit different from, I guess, normal consumer electronics or just normal stuff that you buy on the internet. I have some pretty strong feelings about how the money flows in modern economies, and doing right by that. And I'm lucky enough that I get to make those decisions, being the head of this company, and as we grow, making sure that we stay true to our initial goals of sort of, I think transparency is a bit overused word. Like, that's not the main thing, although I do think it's very important to be transparent and assure people that their money is going to a good place. Because I think there's a lot of conversation these days in coffee around the coffee itself, fair trade, and how well the farmers are being treated and all that stuff. But very little is being spoken about when it comes to the machines that are actually making those. And you'd be surprised that the vast majority of coffee companies, machine companies that especially, who are manufacturing in mainland China, where, as you know, there are governments that are working very closely with Russia and Ukraine invasions and other things and stuff that I just can't stand behind. Even though, I've made a lot of things in my career in mainland China for Apple, as part of the team that helped go and set them up there and do that when the scale in Taiwan just wasn't big enough. And I've seen at the time, this was obviously before a lot of the stuff happened geopolitically, but in my own company, I made a very conscious decision to do everything I can to stay away. And even if it costs more, but I'm okay with that because, we're making things that are not made to be the cheapest. We're making things that are made to last a really long time and to continue these relationships in our supply chain that are going to go on for decades. So the people that we work with, we've been working with since day one, and we know their families, and everyone kind of involved in that are people that we're happy can pay their bills and send their kids to school and do stuff with the success of my own company as well. So I think it's really important that customers and people, spending money on machines and equipment and stuff understand that part of the equation, the way that they understand it, the way with their coffee. It's like it'd be remiss not to include that in the conversation as well.
Yeah, I'm really interested to kind of hear about, I guess, your avatar of, I guess, in terms of, myself and where our business is currently. A lot of times, there's just the spectrum of specialty coffee drinkers is so broad that it feels hard to niche down in terms of, other businesses that are able to say, this exact person is the avatar of our business. With your products, obviously they are upscale luxury type of products that maybe not everyone is putting on their counter. But and then you also have this kind of spectrum of cafes or homes. So how do you approach that? What's I guess the expected purchaser of an EG1?
There's really like the full gamut. I mean, it's tough, and I think I take a pretty firm stance, and we do as a company, around I guess initial cost and cost over life. And that's a very big difference. And we're making things that are expected to last pretty much forever. And so when you try to compare that to something that costs half as much, but is only going to last like 20% of the expected life of that, it's actually cheaper to buy the more expensive thing because cost per use over life ends up going down. And that's something that you'll see across many industries. And it's something that I believe pretty firmly in. You look at, things like refrigerators that were manufactured back in the 1950s, and they would literally last for decades. And you compare that to now, when you have these sort of more modern refrigerators that you maybe buy on Amazon, and every 5 years or so, it's like that becomes landfill and goes away. And like something like a refrigerator used to be something that was a big household expense. You'd save up to buy it with the expectation that you would fix it and use it and be with that thing for a long time. And I believe that type of product, that type of manufacturing and consumerism is not only better for the earth, but I think it's also better for people's relationships with the things that they own. And I really, really care about the ownership experience of products and the true sort of cradle to grave aspect of them. I believe in owning and fixing as opposed to replacing and throwing away. So I believe that our stuff is sort of the antithesis of cheap shit, and in the best possible way. I want people to, if they're ever, we try to build things that don't break, number one. And if they do break, be really easy to fix. And if it requires something to be fixed, you can do it yourself, because we put all the effort into making it sort of simple, which is hard. It's hard to make something simple, and it's easy just to make a bunch of stuff that kind of fits together in a box, right? It's kind of how it works. But when you do that, you end up with something that's more of a joy to use. And if you really look at it over not just your initial investment, but the number of times you're going to use this thing and the amount of joy you're going to extrapolate from it in its life, you end up way, way, way net positive. And it's a hard thing to get your head around because that initial investment is higher. But that's where consumerism needs to change. And part of that initial investment being higher is because we're not manufacturing in mainland China. We're keeping our stuff in places like Taiwan where they do pay people more, and it does cost more to get something out the door. But it means that the money across our supply chain is going towards democracies and not invading other countries, and yada yada yada. And that's it comes with a different price tag, but one that I think that we happily stand behind.
Love all of that. It made me instantly think of, I think about 10 years ago, I got really into selvage denim for a while. And I remember on the Reddit forums, they would always discuss, cost per wear of whatever brand you would buy and how long those are going to stretch out. So, and then I look at our cafe, our oldest cafe, and we've been through 2 EKs there. So that definitely gets me thinking with that. I guess, what are your thoughts on, obviously we're talking about something that is made to last a lifetime. What are your thoughts on like retrofitting, and how much does that, I guess, complicate the design process and iterating and putting out new versions of products? Is it possible to do with something that, especially as of very recently, we have very new technology constantly rolling out in terms of grinder tech. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, what are examples of that? Like, when you talk about retrofitting.
I mean, like for example, I guess like motor RPM on grinders is a fairly new concept. So
we're the first ones to do it. So
yeah.
I'm very familiar with it. Yeah. I think it's great. I think if there's ever a situation where you can retrofit to serve your needs, that should take precedent over buying something new. I think it's great. I think having people understand more about what goes into the things that they already own or could is wonderful. I'm a big modder myself, that was actually one of the things that led me into doing this. Before the EG1 existed, I had kind of every grinder you could imagine, sort of commercial level, before, it's weird to go back because I've already been doing this for, in this for 10 years, more than neck deep. But I remember back when I was modding commercial grinders to be single dosing grinders. And that was what got us to the point where it's wow, we have to actually make a grinder from the ground up to be a true single dosing grinder, because none of these things are going to fit the bill with just mods. It's it has to be done ground up to be what it wants to be. And there is a sort of an inflection point there. And there was a point where, we could do just enough with modding old things and, removing the hopper and taking away the little, do you remember when grinders had dosing paddles? It's kind of mind blowing when you look at it these days, but that was kind of where we started. But if we hadn't gone through those mods and done those things, we wouldn't understand the intricacies on the inside that would lead us to the sort of aha moments of making something new. So yeah, it all starts with modding, and that also increases the sort of understanding of what we're using and the need for why these innovations happen in the first place. This is better for the environment. I mean, if you don't need to buy something, don't.
Absolutely. I personally use the blind shaker every day at home. I would love to kind of just hear about, I guess it was a year ago when Lance Hedrick came out with his video detailing the blind shaker versus WDT. What was that like as an overnight, was it an uptick and sellout instantly of a product that you kind of had on the market for a minute? And how do you anticipate things like that?
Yeah, I mean, by the time they came out with that, for us, it was already, an 8-year-old product. There actually was, if you go back in time, 2016 was when a friend of mine from here in Fukuoka, Japan, actually went and he got number 2 in the World Barista Champs that year. And he was using the blind shaker, and that was part of his routine, and he was already sold on it. And so the visibility of the blind shaker domestically in Japan was really high because there was a Japanese guy who almost won. And so it had like a really big uptick there, but it was like very Japan centered. And then people around the world have been using it too. The guys from, GMB in LA were using that back in the day as a hardcore part of the routine that they knew. And we've always, even after subsequent product launches of things like the Moonraker and stuff, WDT tools and things, we've always said the blind shaker is where you do your sort of 80% and the needles are the 20%. So the 80-20 rule applied to coffee preparation. I also compare it to bread sometimes. It's like the bulk rise and then like, the fine cuts at the end to make it look pretty. And in terms of what actually makes an impact on the coffee. But yeah, like it's stuff that we knew, but we tend to stay pretty silent on these things. We don't have big influencer voices and all this stuff. We're just the machine makers, but it's all based on data and science and our own sort of intimate understanding of the coffee prep process. And because we're going into this with the mindset of the manufacturers and with things like and also just, I guess, who we are as people, we love invention. We love doing these things. So before there was shaking, there was whisking. So we made what used to be called the blind tumbler, and that was it was a shaker without a lid. And so we'd always grind into that and then use like a chopstick implement and basically whisk it, which does the same thing as shaking, which was what led to the basically adding a lid and shaking it and kind of bringing a little bit of cocktail flair into the whole thing. That's where the name shaker came from, like the blind shaker. It just comes from the sort of cocktail world and the implications from that. But yeah, it was great to see. It's great to have that stuff corroborated with, the voices on the internet, because it drives things for a very short time, but it doesn't really determine the sort of long-term trajectory of things. So it can create a blip, but it doesn't really move the tides. What moves the tides is positive small things over, like, on a consistent basis over time. And that's something that it kind of already had going for it, because it was already a steady thing in coffee prep for a lot of people. But I think it's also good at sort of correcting 5 years of erroneous fixation on needles. So we're happy to see that.
Yeah. I hear that you've opened some cafes in the past. Is that true?
Yeah. Timing wasn't the best. I opened them about a year prior to the pandemic here in Japan. And they're really, really fun, because I've always loved cafes and wanted to create spaces. And a really, really big motivating factor for opening the cafes was to have a place nearby where we could put our equipment, beat the crap out of it, and see what happens. And kind of use it as part of our R&D. The unfortunate side is I opened it right before the pandemic. And then, so we opened them, there was some fanfare and they were really cool and everything. Pandemic hit and it was like, you got to shut your cafes. And so doing that, which the other flip side of that is like, it could be a sad story, but having everybody shut their cafes and then drink at home was actually really good for the main business, because then everybody started investing in home coffee equipment, and we were already set up to provide that for people. So cafes was going to be a small side project. It kind of like went down because we were forced to shut from pandemic stuff, but sales took off on the machines, and it was like, we just need to focus on what we're really good at, which is making machines and inventing here, and work with people, whether it's our cafes or not, to learn everything we can from beating them up in a real world scenario. And so it's an easy problem to fix when all you were going for with a cafe was, beat up this machine and tell me what happens. And so we've got lots of testing facilities and people happy to beat up our machines for us now and show us what happes.
Yeah. What was the vibe like in those cafes? Was it kind of slower paced, or what did the menu look like and whatnot?
The menu was really simple. I mean, it was a place where we made like sourdough bread and served like 3 coffee drinks, and you could do an espresso, like a long black, or a milk based drink, and everything was double shot. Everything was a blend that we had made for us from honey coffee. So Hide Izaki's parents. They're from Fukuoka, and I've been friends with them since when Hide was in high school. And they were sort of supplying our coffee, and we just had really good stuff. We brought in like a bread nerd to make sort of tartine style bread the way that I've been making it for a long time, and kept it simple. Had really, they weren't big spaces. They were made to be places where you could come in, kind of like take a breather and have an incredible like cup of coffee, maybe with like a slice of bread and like some avocado toast or something, which was also on the menu. Not a common thing in Japan, but something that I wanted to bring because I just like it. But it requires really good bread, which is also not super cultural around where we're at. Can be had, just not that normally in a coffee shop. And then just really, chill music. We'd have like, I don't know, like imagine surfer vibe mixed with some cool jazz kind of playing, and but a really big focus on the coffee prep process. So we had like a bar, and everything was made where they weren't preparing it with the back to you, they were preparing it right in front of you, and almost like an espresso bar, but with a little bit more time to spend. And so people come in, spend 5 to 10 minutes, have an amazing cup, and then move on. It wasn't the place to come and open your laptop and hang for hours and hours. It was a place to come and just really like take a quick breather from the city where it's at, and then get on with your day, kind of feeling a little bit recharged and hopefully inspired from seeing a very nice presentation of coffee prepared in front of you.
Did you guys have your entire lineup of grinders there? And if so, how did you guys kind of break down, when to use each one of those?
Yeah. It was mainly run with, because we weren't doing pour overs, everything was espresso based. We had one EG1 that would basically serve everything. We did have a couple of different coffees on bar. Right when you would enter the cafe, you had like the bean cellars on a wall rack behind you. And so even though there was like an espresso blend, if someone wanted a single origin, we could take that and we knew exactly what the grind setting was for that. So you could do a single origin on demand without any sort of crosstalk in flavors. And that's something that is enabled by using the EG1, where you don't have a hopper that you have to swap, and you can sort of hot swap between grinders without having to dial in again. And so that was one of the selling points of running a cafe. And it was, even though they're small, we could do 200 shots a day or more with a single grinder, no problems. And that was a nice perk, and it put into practice what we had always believed and preached, which was you can use this grinder, one grinder like this, and then have multiple coffees on serving without having to dial in again. And it was good just to see that work. And it also added credence when other cafes would ask us, I'm thinking about this because XYZ. We could say, okay, well, we're doing that here in cafes that we own and operate, so we know it's going to work for you.
That's very cool. Love that. I think I'll say, first of all, the reason I haven't bought an EG1 for our HQ yet is because I know I'm going to have to turn around and buy 2 more for each of our cafes as soon as it happens. So the day is coming, but cash flow.
But you know some good people to talk to, so
I do.
Can help. Yeah.
So, but where I'm interested there, like I said, we have EKs in each of our cafes. So we do single dosing for some of our by the cup stuff and whatnot with those. Obviously lacking in the areas that that they're lacking compared to a product like yours, especially in terms of versatility. Any tips for a single dose workflow for a cafe that's pushing out some higher volume? We've almost made the change to single dose kind of across the board a couple times throughout our history, but we've always we've been a little too shy. But I'd say we'd like to eventually.
Yeah, I mean, my first thing of advice, one of the problems is when you're single dosing, like grind retention and that stuff becomes like a pretty big deal, especially if you're doing espresso based drinks, because you got to be down to like the nth of a gram in your control. And that's really hard with a grinder that doesn't really put out exactly what you put in. And that's the ethos behind creating, manufacturing, and everything with the EG1. And so it's really hard to do it without a grinder that does that. One thing that I think is really critical to this is, and it sounds like, you're already kind of in the single dosing camp, like bean cellars. Like we make them, well, those aren't things that we do for like, that's not a moneymaker for us, bean cellars. We make like the best thing we can in terms of like a single capsule made for freezing, made for like, just bean storage. But what that does is, by moving away from a hopper, having things in a single dose, you don't have to readjust your dial through the course of a day. And, what we would always do in our own cafes is we understand roughly within 50 shots of how many a day is going to bring in, make a little bit extra, and have that be the pre-open sort of task for the lowest level, like barista. So we come in, pre-dose everything, they're in the cellars, and that's dialed in. But when you know the number, at least on, for example, an EG1, if you know if this particular bean, and we've got 200 of them in a box here, is dialed in at 3.8, it's going to be that throughout the course of the day, probably tomorrow also. Unless you're spanning several days, you won't have to redial that in, and that just becomes, it just moves time from one place in the workflow to another time, and allows you to offset. It allows you to not have to ever measure on bar. So if we would always do 20.0 grams as our dose. And no matter when in the day you took that, like I said, 3.8, if that happened to be like the dial setting on the EG1, you dump it in, you get 20.0 out at any point in the day without any old beans in there. And so you'd never actually stray in terms of product quality of what you're putting out in the cup. And that was a very, very big factor for consistency and quality. And also peace of mind, like knowing that you don't have to dial in again. It's like, when things get busy and it's like you've got a line, you can't be redialing like your espresso machine and all that just because you can't, right? It's like there are people waiting and there's service to be done, and there's always the balance between service and the quality of what you're putting out. And the one thing that I think can never be compromised on is the quality of the drink and how much you're actually extracting from your coffee.
Yeah, I love the idea of the fixed dose. I think myself and my partners Ethan and Ross, we kind of go back and forth on arguments with this, but I'm like, just set it and forget it, especially just in terms of what basket size you're using. Is that typically how you still dial in to this day?
Yeah, I do. There's plenty of variables to mess with, but if you keep some of them fixed and you have a method of keeping them fixed, it allows you to focus more clearly on the other ones. And if you're worried about like your 20.0 thing, and you want to like tweak, then just go to how many grams you're going to extract from that, because you could always change that one. It's just one less thing. When you have every variable and you have to change that, it just gets more and more confusing. But if you keep a couple things constant, then it allows you to, it gives you less stuff to worry about.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier the workflow that G&B and Go Get 'Em were using with, I guess it's their location in the market, where they were using maybe the blind shaker with that. And that's where my mind instantly goes in terms of making a highly efficient, single dosing workflow. Obviously you might be sacrificing something in the sense that everybody wants grind on demand, but if we're talking about overall what's going to tick quality up by a few percentages, obviously using an excellent low retention single dose grinder like the EG1, and then, maybe someone taking shifts of grinding every 15 or 20 minutes and getting things lined up could be a decent workflow that comes to mind for sure.
And the other thing that's tough about, grind on demand is like, you got a hopper, you are going to have a variation in your dial in over the course of a day. And there's going to be oxidation that continues, even if you're going through, several hoppers worth in a day. It's like that stuff is being stored. It's not sealed off. And if you got like enough volume to justify the throwing away and the redialing that you're going to have over the course, maybe, but not everyone has that luxury of selling that many coffees in a day, and some people just don't like the idea of having to throw away and redial in just because you're doing a lot. And I fall into that camp as well. It's like, there's, a very big concept in Japan, and something I believe in is there's a word called mottainai, and it means like, well, it's like an aversion to wastefulness, like a very, very big driving factor for, coming up with a design and like a mechanism that allows you to get out what you put in was watching people using machines 10 years ago where they would weigh their portafilter, grind into it, put a little mountain on it, and then take a spoon and throw away some coffee until they got just the right amount of like grams in their portafilter before tamping. And it was like looking at that and being like, wow, you're throwing away 10% of every dose just to get the right amount. And you look at that at the top of this pyramid where there's, coffee being consumed there. Imagine what a diss that is to the farmers and the people actually like creating this stuff. And that is where I draw the line. It's like, and that's all because the grinder isn't doing what it's supposed to. So if we can fix that, we should fix that.
Love it. Just want to speak for a minute on brand and kind of, can you just give me a glimpse as someone who's trying to grow a company of how did you, roadmap from the beginning to growing your brand to the place where I think, really when people look at the innovators and the premium products in the at this point across the board between brewers, grinders, accessories, they think about Weber. So what are the steps to, obviously easier said than done, but what are the steps to take a company to that spot?
For us, it's been really slow growth. I think that you'll see, a lot of brands kind of come out and it's just like, it's boom. Like, and I think that they do that by leveraging beyond their state of growth. It's I wouldn't say it's easy because it's not something that I've done, but you can borrow money or get investors, hire a team of people, create this like really clear brand voice, like make sure that you've got 5 marketing points and just like unleash the floodgates from day one and create this like big boom. And I think that's how a lot of like new brands tend to start. We didn't do that. I was very intentional about starting this thing kind of as a test just to see if it was even going to stick. And, doing it without taking outside investments and starting slowly, but only growing organically has allowed us to kind of in the way that, like slow growth trees work. It's like a slow growing tree ends up with a harder wood and like a stronger core. It's taken us 10 years to get where we've gotten, but it's because it's been slow growth. All of the people that have come and joined like our team along the way, pretty much everyone's stuck. We don't have like an attrition rate on our team. We're just really, really careful in who we hire and making sure that, they fit well with the team. And that allows kind of a stronger, more focused growth and also not rushing decisions. The fact also that, ironically, I say not rushing decisions doesn't mean that we move slowly, because when we do decide to do something, not having other people tell us what to do allows us to do exactly what we want to do really quickly. But in terms of brand growth, it's really, I would say that there is some crazy master plan, but there's no real crazy master plan. You can never see more than 2-3 years out anyway. And so we just try to stay true to our initial goals, make sure that we're always aware of what we need to be doing in today, and then obviously the next couple of months, with sights set on a couple of years out and which direction we want to be moving in, but always willing to reassess the sort of vector of that growth as well. Just as long as we don't do anything that would go against like who we are as people and what our core values are.
I'm always interested to hear from other people in the industry who obviously we're in an industry that prides itself in slowing down and enjoying coffee in a more meaningful way than it maybe necessarily has to be enjoyed. What's kind of your take on social media? Like, do you see it as kind of this like a necessary evil to play with the business, or I asked that because I think you guys do an awesome job, especially your video content is so tasteful and sharp.
Thanks. Takes on social media. I believe that there is a necessary evil. I believe it comes from a good place. I think the idea of sort of democratizing like a voice is a good thing. we don't spend money on ads, which is a very, very big thing. I would say the majority of brands and companies, that's a big portion of their expenditures. I don't believe it. I don't want to be putting money in Zuckerberg's pocket. I don't want you to go to Facebook and have a sold ad to you just because you happen to like coffee that says buy Weber stuff. It's not inherently evil, but it doesn't feel super clean. The concept of like giving a quote unquote influencer a bunch of money to pretend that they like something is not something that I'm into. I know that this gets frustrating even for us internally because we've got people on the inside. I'm going to call you out, Andrew, that tell us, oh, like it's just how it's done these days. It's like, in the past we would give that to a magazine that run an ad, and I understand like the cleanness of like you got a magazine and an ad, and there's people doing work on the back end and all that stuff, and I also understand how like the sort of influencer economy works. It's like these are people doing real work and doing good stuff and all of that, but the people that tend to do well on that have their own means of monetization as well, and they're getting paid per clicks. They've got like paid ads and other things, and I believe really strongly in relationships and in having things be win-win relationships. I like to work with people where there's a benefit for them in chatting with us. I want to be able to provide something for them to learn, and if it comes down to it, be able to give them sort of early access to the stuff that we're working on, because I do believe that we are the cutting edge of sort of design in coffee and innovation there, because that's what we spend our days and our lives in. That's what we dream about at night, and that's what we are passionate about. And if we can bring them into that fold, and that's a positive win for them in terms of bringing in new viewership and in a sense like clicks, that's great. I just don't think it's ever right for somebody to send free stuff in with like the hope of coverage or something else. It's like, I'm not saying that we've never provided things like free of charge. We put things on loan to people sometimes, but we don't like give out influencer free units of stuff. Like I just don't believe in that. It's it seems disingenuous. But at the same time, it also allows us to not spend a lot of money on like marketing and advertising, which allows us to put more money into the products and allows the consumer to ultimately get more for their dollar when they're purchasing. Because we don't do huge markups. It's like we're not making something for $5 and selling it for $100. Or our margins are actually fairly slim compared to normal business practices. And I think that that's the good part of social media. Like we are able to do stuff that creates a voice that gets to people without having to spend a lot of money on it.
That's awesome. We're also just in an industry where I think, if you did go in that direction of heavy, heavy influencer marketing, if you look in the comments of many of those videos, you have so many people with such, high speculation of if there's any scent of this person was paid off, then you definitely hear it from people in the coffee industry, I think. So,
yeah, I mean, it tends to be yes and no. The other downside, and this is the thing that's tough about it, is I believe that everybody has their own motivations, right? So even when you look at people who are into the sort of influencer economy, or they're making their money on YouTube or Instagram, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's not always going to be there's going to be certain dialogues around it. There's going to be certain dialogues that are missed from that. And if you go back to things like the conversations about transparency, and I believe that like that conversation is so open and so ready when it comes to the coffee beans, but like almost nobody when you get into social media and influencer land talks about where stuff is made. And if they do, it's like they're not getting into what it means to manufacture in countries where the governments are doing atrocious things. And that's a conversation I think that is it's ripe to be had. So yeah. I do hope that changes.
Agreed. All right, just kind of in closing, I haven't even really asked. I mean, what's kind of your daily coffee process look like? Do you kind of inch towards any specific thing in your lineup, or is it always on the bird, or just tell me more about that?
No, I mean it It kind of depends where I'm at, or I don't know. I tend to go through phases. I mean, strangely, this morning was a rarity where I woke up and while making breakfast for the kids, I have a Cremina like in the family kitchen, and I have a key grinder next to it. And that tends to be like my morning shot while preparing breakfast for family. This morning I turned it on, didn't make a coffee, and turned it off. So I was like, that is not happening right now. And then here in the office in the studio, we've got a GS3 that's always on. It's just a 24/7 machine. So I made myself a coffee right when I got into work, and it was a breakfast coffee. So I made a cortado, which is what I usually have first thing in the morning, before there's a lot of food in the gut. I'll do that. And then sometime mid-morning, I'll probably make myself a bird. So after this, that'll probably be the next thing. Make a bird. That'll be sort of like my filter brew, if you will. It gets me through. Huge caffeine kicks on those things. Extraction yield is extremely high from a bird. You can get like 24-25% of those things. And for some reason, they pull the caffeine right out. And since you're doing like a 25 gram dose in that brewer, some people, especially in North America, will argue that it's like a single serving thing. I firmly believe it should be shared with 2 or 3 people, just because of the caffeine kick that you get from coffee made on it. But that'll get me through sort of the rest of the morning. And then I may or may not have a coffee after lunch, just depending on how I feel.
Nice. I'm honestly, I ordered a bird yesterday. Just kind of been thinking about this conversation, and I've always looked at it from afar, and I'm just such a fan of the zero bypass brewing. I used the Pulsar a good bit, and I've loved the results. So I don't see any reason why I wouldn't be into the bird too. So we're stoked to get that here and play with it.
Cool. I'm glad to hear.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for being on. I think this has been awesome. I know that we have lots of fans of you and Weber as a brand who listen to our show. So thanks for kind of giving them a glimpse of what you guys are about.
Well, thanks for having me on. And I enjoyed talking with you, and I hope we can chat again in the near future.
Yeah, me too. All right. Cool. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Riley.